It was May 16th, 1976. I was in the fifth grade at that time. The week before that, we had just completed our elementary school field day games, track and field, and we broke this, student population down in three teams: red, white, and yellow, I think. Uh, and in we had a really good field day. Everybody was having so much fun from that, and I think they decided that during that week that we would carry on the celebration for the good efforts and by the students and the community by having picnics. Each team would have a picnic in whatever their location may be, chosen location. So that we would go after church service, then we would go to our different places for the picnic. Uh, During service, I think in early in the morning, on Saturday, the day before, we had gone fishing, you know, and prepare some other stuff. And people were cooking overnight, and then some people were cooking something more in the morning. And I can't remember whether somebody asked me to go down to the shore. I think to get salt water for something they were cooking or something. So I went down to the to the shore, and I realized that there's so much debris, and the wind was blowing really hard, and I can see the wave just kind of like building up across the lagoon, and the gust started to the wind started gusting really high to the point where they start breaking breadfruit branches, and that's kind of a signal, or kind of like a demarcation of like strong wind when in weather talk, or they would say, look, oh yeah, did you realize how strong that wind was last night? It was a break. It broke breadfruit branches, so that means that it was really high. But that morning it was building up. It just continued to build up. So I went back and I told these people, I said, you know what? I don't think anybody can go picnic on the other side of the lagoon. You guys come down and see. The wave is coming up on shore really high. I mean, they're pushing up further, on shore than normal. But this time, the church services were going on. So we went into the church and we just kind of whispered in the ear of one of the, elders sitting by the church. I said, or some people were telling them, maybe, you know, you guys might want to come out and look at this. So people didn't really finish up the church service, or I think they barely finished the church service. I think one of those abbreviated things that they just did, and you know, they went out of the and they started running to their places. It was kind of, really caught off everybody off guard. Uh, I was with my grandparents and my sister also, and my little brother Steve. Um, my other relatives were like running around, and we, for some reason, we came down from our usual homestead overnight to come and sleep over at our family's place by the school in this nice house. So we stayed there, but then we were panicking because my father and my mother were not on island at that time, nor were anybody else. And none of my uncles were there. It was just me, my grandparents, and my sister, and my one of my younger brothers, the youngest one at that time, Steve. Oh my goodness! And we were just like, oh, my older sister just had her baby. That's Joanna at that time, 1976. So she was just a year, I mean, a few months old baby. So we, for some reason, the people from my village just decided that we should go into the bigger houses that were close to the the southern end of the island. Um, I don't know why. Later on, I found out why. It was because the previous typhoon or major storm, which was in 1907, that was the only place that was kind of like dry. Every other part of the island was underwater. However, this time we were wrong because we were actually moving to the front of the storm. But as we went into the houses, we saw other houses floating by, and getting waves were crashing from both sides of the island, from lagoon side and ocean side, and they would crash. One time they crashed right into this house, and it just went up in the air, and disappeared in the water. So we then the wave came and hit the house we were in. So we got out, and we started looking for a dry area, and we saw this one little bit of a dry area, but it started getting, by then it was late afternoon, it was getting late during the day. So more people start congregating around that area, the dry area. The people who were not mobile, some people were carrying them. uh, there was one man who decided that he wasn't going to leave his house. And he was around 90 at that time, and his son decided that he was going to stay with him in this second floor place. And they actually rode out the storm in the middle of the storm. And it was just brutal. Now, back to us. We were standing all around, and we knew we had to do something, but we just don't know what to do. And then we heard this faint shouting. Uh, there were two men. I remember him very clearly at that time. They were with the rest of the island on the other end, towards the other end, and it was actually drier. You know, the waves doesn't they didn't go all the way out to the outer side, outside on the lagoon side. I mean the ocean side. They were crashing from the ocean side because the lagoon basically opens right into the storm like this. So but for I mean it wasn't the waves were not strong enough to cover the whole island all the way out to the other side. But it was raining and windy, and it was cold, and the breadfruit trees were falling. Uh, Waves were crashing and creating like little, inlets on in the middle of the island. Basically, it's like river streams, but really strong currents. And I got caught in one of those. As now we were evacuating because these men came and told us, why don't you guys come with us? Because it's not safe here, but it's actually it's getting dark, and there's some dry areas back where we came from. So now we were evacuating everybody. I had to take my grandfather with me, basically grab his hand, and sometimes I would have him like hold on to me, and I would try to carry him. But they didn't go too far. Sometimes, if we're in weight, I mean, if we're in waist deep water, then I could carry him with me. Um, uh, and then we came into this one of these newly created craters, basically, and it was wide as much as it was deep. And then everybody went across, and we were the last one before the next set of waves came in. And I remember just pushing my grandfather up so somebody would grab his arm, his hands. And then the water hit me, and it was not so much the water as the rocks that were kind of like blown in the water, and it's almost like somebody's throwing rocks at my legs. So I got caught off guard and I fell, and I started to look for something to hold on to. And I remember grabbing onto this coconut leaves and just held onto it, and everybody's what yelling at me. My grandfather was like, "Oh, my son is dead. He's like is blown away, and he's gonna drown." And all the men were just like yelling at me, "Just hold on to that thing. Don't let go. Whatever you do, don't let that go." So I just kept my head above the rushing water, and every now and then, like if it gets too high, I would dive down and I would just hold my breath. But then, when the wave pulled back, I realized I was in the tree, was but like 6 or 7 feet high, you know, and I had to climb down and basically jump down and scramble to the other side of the crater. So, and then we continued to go on. I remember where we would, if like we would go 100 yards, and we'd turn around and we'd see a breadfruit fall tree or a coconut tree fall where we had just left about few seconds or minutes ago. It was kind of really harrowing. And then we finally got to the dry area where everybody was. Uh, I tell you, it was such a mayhem. The thing that I was worried about that would kill us was the cold, the hypothermia. So we were all just huddling under this bandanas tree, and the bandanas tree has these long roots that shoots into the sand. So we would all huddle into this area and just trying to keep warm, all four of us, five of us. Um, and everybody was screaming and shouting, and so the men were like building. Everybody was building like thatch huts, just trying to get everybody warm, building fire. And I remember me and my grandparents were kind of like a bit of a distance away from where the fire was, but we couldn't move because we were just really cold, and we just held on until the daybreak. Um, and we stayed like in that area with everybody else for days. I think we couldn't go back to our places because it was all underwater. Uh,
What did you do for food?
the men were very resourceful in going to to the taro area where the taro field has been, because they're all buried underwater. I mean, under sand. So it basically dug up all the taro and the breadfruit, and the breadfruit was all over the place. So they 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 located some pots, huge pots, and they start cooking for everybody. And whatever they could get on, like the chicken were like, they're shocked basically, so they couldn't move. So you just grab them and then cook them. Pigs. It was understood at that time that we need to survive, and that people would be willing to give up their.
You
And it
told
took
me that I think I remember that the fish had come in to the reef.
yeah, yeah. And then weeks later, when the water came down, we saw these huge like mountains of rocks that's been blown up from the deep area, and it stretched almost as far along the lagoon. And the thing was, maybe because of the storm, the fish were like just running into each other, not each other, but they were just trying to run into this thing. It's into this huge collection of rocks. And we would go fishing, and it was the easiest fishing we've ever done in ages, because it looked to us, we just say basically the fish has gone crazy, and we were catching so much fish, without going too far. But the people were like, that's kind of like how it happens after a storm. The fish would just, would do that, for some reason. And
How did they make fire?
they built fire by the old traditional way of, rubbing sticks, kind of like every other indigenous population figure out how to rub sticks together to make fire. And our islanders were just as resourceful as it is. They know, the breadfruit. I mean, the coconuts are like they may be wet on the inside, but the on the outside, but the inside they're very good. Fire, you firewood. Basically. So they would tell us to go and look for coconuts, uh, and we it was kind of like huge camp of people on that small stretch of the lagoon part that was still dry.
How did your
But
sister and her baby get along with this?
uh, my sister and baby Joanna were staying with uh, the the husband's or their father's family, their family at that time. So every now and then we'd go just walk about 100 yards or so to go and visit them, and they came and they look for us, and it was really a miracle that nobody died.
That's what
That's
I
the
thought.
thing. It was
And your
just
your grandfather, how did he fare?
he fared pretty well, a lot better than I thought. I thought he would be sick from all of the he getting thrown around all the time, and I was pulling his arm sometimes, and I just feel really horrible sometimes when I look back, and I'm literally just trying to drag him with me to you know. But he was a strong old man, and he held up pretty well all the way until these last days. I mean,
And how about your grandmother?
my grandmother was okay too. She was really into weaving the we would just go cut leaves and bring it to her, and she would just could weave, and her and her friends, several other old ladies would just sit around in circle and just keep weaving these things, and people were putting up uh, huts really quickly, and the men will just like were really busy just putting up frames, and women were weaving, and young people were just putting up these things, and there was a couple of like altercations between some young kids and some old guy who claimed that these kids went to his property and and broke into his store. Well, the problem is there was no store to break into. What happened was the wave basically took the store and ripped it up, and all of the goods that were in that store got blown to the other side of the island, washed to the other side of it. So everybody walked there and they saw him and they picked him up. Like
And what
and
happened
they
to the churches?
oh yes, the churches. Uh they were the Protestant church was completely destroyed, I think. Yeah, and the Catholic church was just inundated with sand, and I think that's kind of like what saved it because for some reason all this sand just blew in there, and it just kind of held the frame in place. It lost some roofs, I think, which was easy. No, there was no windows to those churches, I remember, so there was no loss there. Uh, they had taken the crucifix and all of that stuff and wrapped them up and then put it in the back in the sacristy, and those were still there, I think, when we found them. Uh,
And I have to. I think it took about a month before the American ships got there with supplies.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
remember the arrival of those ships?
Oh, they were like sight for excitement, celebration. I think we pretty much know that we finally we're getting some relief, and people were coming back trying to look for their relatives. And one thing they couldn't see, because they were, because of the way, I mean, America, there's so much destruction, they could look from one end of the island all the way up to the other end. Then that's
Did
what they
your
kept saying.
parents come back at that time?
Yeah, they came back, and we didn't have really, like, there was only one of our house was standing, but it was not easy to occupy. I mean, it wasn't livable. That's what I'm trying to say. So what we did was we went right back to our homestead and then just rebuild there, and then continue to rebuild it in the other places. But it was easy to rebuild where we were at our homestead, because we just had to put up the pretty much the same size. But my dad was a good builder. He built huts all the time. Seems like everywhere he went, he liked to build a hut there. And I remember he built me a hut. Uh, yeah. Anyways, yeah. So it took a while for school to get back on track, because it was actually May, June, July, and August. Then we reopened, but we were always kind of like, to this day, to be quite honest, I mean, just to kind of show, to this day in 2018, last year, in May, some more like his people here in Hawaii still hold a Memorial Day on May 16th. And that was 1976.
How was the mental health? Did people have emotional breakdowns and suffer post-traumatic stress disorders?
I wouldn't know what that was. I didn't. I remember a lot of people. I don't remember anything. I mean, to be quite honest, I don't remember anything that would indicate to me that, oh, these people has mental health issues. But everybody went on just trying to rebuild, you know, their lives. They went back to church. They just, you know, pray as hard as they had always praying, as they had always prayed, and get back onto the business of trying to rebuild the island.
And what did the Americans deliver that was helpful?
They had this program. FEMA had this program replacing houses with this wooden board with a tin roof. I can't remember how big it was, but basically what they did was they came out with all this uh, stuff to rebuild houses. I mean, to build new houses. It's called Typhoon Shelter. They also had USDA surplus food, more surplus food. Uh,
But when it
they
really came
rebuilt.
down to food, the islanders had enough food, or because of the loss of the taro, were people
Yeah.
starting to need the Western foods?
Well, then it became more available, the rice, because almost every ship you have like shitloads of rice, bread, flour,
Oh, okay.
canned vegetables, canned fruits, canned juice. There's like huge cylinders of apple juice and macaroni and dried eggs,
What about peanut butter?
peanut butter. Yeah, those two.
And the houses that these typhoon houses that they provided the supplies for, looking back on it, was that an improvement in the housing on the island?
Well, I think for a while it helped because, I mean, as a temporary measure, but those things last, many years. Um, it wasn't until it get everybody back on track to one thing they didn't rebuild was those huge canoe houses that were built from thatch roof and bandanus leaves. They were replaced by these, uh, you know, tin roof, about the same size, maybe it's even smaller. That's built on the shoreline, as part of this relief, and also, people start building them privately. Um,
And are tin roofs better than thatch?
well, it lasts longer than thatch roof, but they're more expensive. Thatch roof, basically, you gather them, and you have and many friends and families to weave them, and then you put them up. As where, tin roof, you buy it from Bueno and you put it on the ship. So you have to have a lot of money for it, and
But the
that's why they
Americans
don't have a
were
lot.
the Americans were providing that tin.
Uh, no, not for. I mean, it was different kind of assistance, I think. Yeah, yeah. I think it was private, basically, privately owned until much later on. Much later on, they became, uh, part of, national government, not the U.S. but FSM government, what they call community projects, to build those meeting houses, they call them, that will be like for each clan or each family, would have a meeting house of some sort, which basically means it's a large dwelling where, beside meeting in it, you can sleep and do whatever it is, for general dwelling.
I was also wondering, why do you think nobody died or got seriously injured?
Mm, I think because everybody worked together. I saw a lot of young men, helping out, some of the elderlies. Uh, some of the frail ones, I remember, were also carried. A lot of people carried, on their, stretcher type, or, on their back. I remember one, my uncles had to carry his own father on his back. It was quite a very humbling sight to see. Really, really touched my, when I think back on it, kind of like visualizing everybody. It's almost kind of like we were kind of like, uh, kicked out from one end of the island and tried to get to the other side of the island in a storm. Basically, it was humbling. It's very humbling. Now, why somebody didn't die? I don't know. It could be like, sure. Had we stayed longer where we were, I'm pretty sure all of us would have, died. If it wasn't for those two men who came across, you know, really braved the weather, and they were just trying to look to see if anybody survived. And the more they braved into the front of the storm, you know, the worrier they were that they may not probably would not be able to find anybody alive.
Do you remember who
But they,
those two men are?
yeah, 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 they've both passed on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also wondering, why did your island have no warning that a hurricane was coming?
Uh, that's the thing. They were like on the radio now, in the morning when they see us, because it's Sunday morning for one thing. Nobody. The only way to communicate outside, you know, is on this radio. Um, is on this two-way radio, but also a receiver. And people were already in church. I mean, nobody expected a storm on Sunday morning because nobody would be like left to listen to the radio or monitor it for anything. So when they were doing the radio back and forth, they basically were just kind of like, okay, now another wave is coming, and pretty soon we're going to go off the air. And if you don't hear from us again, you just might as well think that we are all dead. You know, so it was kind of like really sad and scary at that
And what
time. And
happened to your canoes?
yeah, we saw the waves carrying them into the jungle areas, and then we saw the breadfruit crashed on them. Some one or two, maybe the hulls were still intact, but the outrigger was not. But for the most part, I think that that part got blown away in that storm. The thatch meeting houses, the thatch canoe houses, and those canoes. Yeah.
That must have been
So
heartbreaking for a bunch of people.
yeah, I saw grown men, old men cry just looking at these canoes. Yeah. Afterwards.
Well, is there anything else about this hurricane that you would want your family to know or people to know?
Uh, I think for those of us who lived through it, I mean, it kind of served as a significant marker for us. We always remember like, oh yeah, 2 years after Pamela, or 2 years before Pamela, or during Pamela. That was kind of like a marker for everyone. But also, in a way, people distinguish changes. Like, oh, these things start happening after the typhoon. Oh, the typhoon did this, and therefore, oh, all of these things start coming in after the typhoon. You know,
You mean like Western things?
Western things.
Change.
Yeah, change. A lot of change. A lot of changes start taking place after typhoon. I think and that's because people were forced to pay attention to an event or an issue, and they choose to address it certain ways. You know, they threw money at it. Sometimes it was not necessary, I guess. And but they made some changes in a way that some cultural practices were kind of and artifacts were you know lost in that area. But
But yet people came together and survived, and they depended on traditional skills and knowledge.